Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Havoc, and I'm honored to have you with me. Welcome to a critique of Jurassic World. This series will be walking scene by scene through the movie, focused primarily on the writing. I will also be analyzing its main setups and payoffs as well as character arcs. There may be a few other odds and ends thrown in as well, but this will be the bulk of the critique. As such, this series will contain spoilers for the entire film. If for some reason you haven't watched the film and were hoping for a spoiler-free review, this may not be the series for you. Now I want to lay out some ground rules and setup for the series for just a moment, and if you don't care to hear how I will be approaching this critique and why I'm making it to begin with, you may want to simply skip to the time code on the screen. That being said, let's address a few things quickly before we jump in. First off, you would be justified in asking, why are you doing a critique of a movie that came out in 2015? Well, there are actually a few reasons for this, not the least of which being that I love this movie. Now, that may be a concern for some people who are wanting to hear the flaws in the movie in a lengthy critique, but this is precisely the reason I thought this film would be so helpful. You see, I do love this movie, but I don't believe it's necessarily very well written. On a level personal to me, I enjoy seeing dinosaurs, I love seeing the original T-Rex get its moment in the spotlight, and I love some of the emotional payoffs this movie offers. From the more subjective perspective, this movie is an 8.5 or 9 out of 10 for me. However, this is something that I cannot necessarily translate to you. My goal is to break down the more concrete aspects of the film, consistency of writing, character development, and so on. Some would frame this as the objective versus the subjective. Now, I do understand that you can never fully remove the artist from the art, but as much as possible, I would like to offer as unbiased a take on the movie as I can. To achieve this, I've tried to extensively study the film and make sure my references are correct, as, in some sense, a criticism is only as good as it can be demonstrated. Secondly, there hasn't been much in the way of actual critique of this movie. There have been some reviews that are typically about 10 minutes long, but I have found it difficult to locate anyone who has taken the time and walked through the positives and negatives of the film. I will attempt to do just that in this series. Thirdly, I want to note that I intend to try to be fair to the movie. I'll try to draw out both the good and the bad. As a bit of a disclaimer, this is the first series of this kind I have ever attempted. I don't say this to somehow preemptively dodge criticism if my critique is inaccurate, but rather to explain that this is a learning process for me in virtually every area. I hope to continually improve the quality as I go. Fourthly, I want to preempt many of the arguments some may attempt to offer to justify certain parts of the writing. I will not be accepting an appeal to external sources other than the other canonical movies in this series. A piece of media should stand on its own, or in the case of a sequel, it should be consistent with the movies that came before it. Even if another piece of media has been released to try to fix an issue, the movie relying on an external source is not a good quality for it to have. This is a movie series. Your movie should be coherent without me having to search out external sources just to make sense of what's happening. Websites might be nice for fans to enjoy, but if a website tries to fix a problem in the movie, I don't count that as admissible. These sites often directly contradict what we are told in the movie. For example, at the time of this writing, the Jurassic World website claims raptors can run up to 24 miles an hour. However, Jurassic World will tell us that they can go 40 to 50 miles an hour.
How fast can they run?
40. 50 when they're hungry.
For these and other reasons, external sources are disqualified. I also will be taking the word of the movie on issues such as the speed of the T-Rex rather than the more recent studies that have come out on the issue. In cases like this, it's about what is established in-universe when these specifics are given. When the movie appeals to our current understanding of science to justify something, that will open it to scrutiny from current science. However, canon comes first. Lastly, to avoid the ever-present YouTube copyright claim bot swarm, I won't be using too much footage from the movie itself, as I'm not overly sure what will and won't get the video immediately claimed. Again, this is my first venture into these waters, and I want to begin the voyage smoothly. Instead, I'll be using quite a bit of footage from Jurassic World Evolution, with a few clips from the film sprinkled in. Now, with that all being said, let's dive in, shall we? Jurassic World begins with a camera close-up on one egg and then two as they hatch. Eventually, one of the dinosaurs gets a significant chunk broken off and reveals part of the face of an Indominus Rex. This is a short, simple, but somewhat effective scene. You see, the Jurassic series has always opened with a scene containing some form of dinosaur. The first Jurassic Park gave us the memorable scene with the raptor in the cage. The second gave us the compies.
Are you looking at this? I'm afraid there isn't enough to go around.
And the third, though in a scene that was a bit weird for many reasons, gave us implied dinosaurs at least, likely pteranodons.
What happened to them?
I don't know.
Being the dinosaurs are absolutely the reason most people watch these films, it makes sense to give a teaser to start things off. It also sets a bit of a thematic tone, as the bulk of this movie will revolve around one of these dinosaurs. I'm not going to read too much into themes here, I simply pause to say, it's a nice little detail. There's also a good piece of continuity in this scene as well, as later in the movie we learn that there were originally two, though one did eat the other at some point.
So I thought there were two of them.
There was a sibling in case this one didn't survive infancy.
Anyways, we then move to a house in what appears to be the middle of winter, with a mother loading a suitcase into the van yelling for the boys to get a move on. We then see a young boy named Gray looking at old photos of dinosaurs through a Viewmaster. Every square inch of his room is covered by robots, dinosaurs, cameras, and starships. His mother enters the room urging him to hurry and get in the van as his flight is in 2 hours. And he responds by saying,
Dane County Airport is 36 minutes away, 60 with traffic.
And is promptly ushered out of the room. Outside we see Gray's brother Zack with presumably his girlfriend in his arms. She's being a typical clingy girlfriend and Zack seems relatively disinterested. On a side note, David Wallace is in the movie as the dad, so that's cool. Anyways, Zack gets in the van, his parents poke fun at him over what just played out, and Zack puts on his Beats headphones. Such a simple scene, but such a problem with the way the writers chose to introduce these characters. And we'll see this as a recurring theme throughout the movie. See, it's one thing to establish core attributes of the people you'll be following, but it's an entirely different thing for the movie to scream them at you. Gray is a nerd. This is about all you need to know about him. And rather than the writers allowing you to learn this in a more subtle and fleshed out way, where this character can have more than a singular dimension, they crammed it into your face in just under 30 seconds. Likewise, Zack is a typical disinterested teen boy. The bonus for Zack, however, is that we've been introduced blatantly to only one of his two characteristics. In a matter of a few minutes, we'll be learning the only other thing this movie will bother to set up about him. He has a thing for everything with XX chromosomes. This is all that there is to these two characters. In fact, you could argue these are caricatures, not characters, and it's to the detriment of this movie. Perhaps this seems harsh, but as this infects much of the film, it may be wise to park here a moment and draw a comparison. How does the original Jurassic Park introduce the kid characters? Well, both kids run up to Hammond happy to see their grandpa just like normal kids. They're giddy about riding in a helicopter as most adults would be, not to mention children. In the next scene, we see Lex is fascinated with the technology in the Jeeps. This more subtly establishes that she at least has a fascination with technology, but in a much less ham-fisted way. It serves as more of a setup for the payoff of her using the computer later in the movie, rather than her sole-defining characteristic. At this point, it's more of an interesting detail about her than anything. Tim then has a conversation with Dr. Grant, and he is indeed a bit on the nerdy side during this conversation. However, this really isn't what defines him as a character. In most of the movie, he's a normal kid who just happens to have a nerdy scene. This isn't the case with Gray, as his nerdiness is shoved in our face every chance the movie gets. As a result, Tim and Lex are more authentic and more multi-dimensional characters than Gray and Zack. But, you might say, why does that even matter? That's a fair question, and I'll try to explain it with another illustration drawn from the original Jurassic Park. Imagine, if you will, that at the end of Jurassic Park, instead of the group being saved by the T-Rex, all of the raptors pounce on Grant and tear him apart, killing him. Perhaps this distraction gives the rest of the group time to escape, and the movie ends. The audience would be devastated at the loss of Grant, and rightfully so. They learned about him and grew to like him and his caring for Lex and Tim throughout the movie. His intelligence in his field, his personality in the various conversations he's in, and the relationships he develops with many of the characters all serve to endear us to his character. As a result, we're now invested in Grant. We want to see him survive the island and continue to the next movie. Now, contrast that with Gennaro. That would be the lawyer from Jurassic Park. This poor guy hides himself from the T-Rex, which, in most scenarios, isn't the worst idea possible. But, instead of getting away scot-free, he has his bathroom moment disturbed by Ian leading the T-Rex right to him. One heck of an unlucky day. Poor guy. Anyways, as I'm sure you're aware, the T-Rex wasn't feeling overly merciful, and he, well, put it this way, the lawyer won't be in any sequels. But did you notice something? The lawyer's untimely demise isn't mourned by a single person. Why? Well, as far as character goes, we knew very little about him. He was a lawyer and he wanted to make money for the park. Did he have a good personality? Well, maybe, when he isn't coming across as a little too greedy for most. Does he have a family? Perhaps a newborn and a wife at home? Does he donate to charity? Does he spend most of his life fighting for orphans and trying to give them a better life? Is most of his lawyerly work assisting those who are unable to defend themselves free of charge? That's entirely possible. All of these things would endear us to his character. Were all these things given to us by the movie as aspects of who he is, we would probably view his character death a little differently. But, as is, we don't really care much outside of the shallow, well, there goes that dude. Why? The movie didn't take the time to develop him much beyond a one-dimensional side character. And that was all he was needed for in this movie. We weren't supposed to care about him. Gray and Zack, on the other hand, are one of the main plots of the movie. We're supposed to care about them, yet
blood-sucking lawyer
arguably got more character development. This is why it matters. In general, it affects the stakes and our level of investment. Regardless, these are the characters you're gonna get, and you will just have to deal with it. So with that, we move on. Next, we're brought to the family saying their goodbyes in the airport. The mom... hang on, what's her name? Wait, seriously? No way. Okay, so Karen says goodbye to Gray and gives him a big hug while visibly holding back some tears. I'm so sorry, I just can't help but laugh that her name is Karen. This will be the most appropriate name for this character, as we will see later in the film. Anyways, Karen turns to Zack, who is completely mentally absent from his surroundings. A little back and forth, and the boys walk off, presumably to board their flight. The shot stays back with the parents as Dad David Wallace says,
"So much for our last family breakfast."
Karen responds with,
Why do you have to say things like that?
They briefly discuss Karen's sister and how she handles 20,000 people a day, and 2 more shouldn't be a problem. Outside noting that Zack is again being very clearly proclaimed to be a one-dimensional character, this scene is the setup for 2 parts of the narrative, the divorce and Claire. We'll handle these as we come across them later, so we shall simply move on for now. The boys' plane is seen landing, and then we observe them getting on the boat that will take them to the island. I think it may be relevant to read to you the exchange between Zack and Gray in this short scene. Gray: how big is the island? Zack: big. Gray: but how many pounds? Zack: that doesn't make sense. Gray then gives this monologue.
When they first opened, they had 8 species. Now they have 14 herbivores and 6 carnivores. That's like 50 tons of food a week.
This monologue is delivered while the boys are standing on some high point of the boat. Zack then looks down to see a small group of young girls, and one smiles at him. Zack tries to play it cool and casual, while also still casting more glances her direction. The boys then exit the boat and find that their aunt has sent an assistant rather than meeting them herself. Gray asks, "Where's Aunt Claire?" Though one quick scene a moment ago may not have been sufficient to fully establish the nerd, disinterested teen dynamic, this scene seems to be a missed opportunity to give us more than simply what the previous scenes established. It would be great instead to let them have a conversation that would lead to more character development. Something that tells us there's more to these characters than nerd and disinterested teen. We get it. Gray's a nerd. Why not use this aspect of his character and this moment for conversation to help us learn more about him? For example, and this really is off the top of my head, why not have him say he would love to work as a scientist for Jurassic World one day? This would use the nerd aspect of his character to teach us more about him. It gives us an example of what he aspires to. Rather than just telling us he knows stuff, it tells us more about him as a character. This interaction could even lead to him asking what Zack wants to do when he graduates in a few years, which would flesh him out more as well. This may not be exactly gold, but I do think it's better than what we got. I also just came up with this as I typed this script and wasn't paid handsomely to do so, so I think the criticism is fair. As to the Claire aspect of the scene, well, we're about to be introduced to her, so we will hold that thought for just a moment. Now, there are a few quick moments of the boys on the tram, entering the park, and entering their hotel room, as well as an overview shot of the park. The tone seems fairly well done for this part, even though the boys are still one-string guitars. The familiar Jurassic music rises as you, along with the boys, are introduced to this new park. And perhaps this is just me, but it seemed like the director knew that we missed Jurassic Park and was welcoming us to this new park through the proxy of the boys. Now, this may all seem very obvious, but as a huge fan of the original Jurassic Park, this introduction landed very well for me. You could fairly say that this is entirely my opinion on the matter, but I believe that the writer and director did love the original Jurassic Park. There are other sequels to older movies that have come out recently, where you get the sense that the writer really hated or at least didn't care much about what came before it. I'm looking at you, TLJ. I add this part, however, because I believe I can back this claim up with references and will gladly do so as we continue through this critique. Anyways, we then pan to a woman named Claire going over some names and features of a few people while the elevator descends. The door opens and looking into the camera she says,
Welcome to Jurassic World.
We cut to her walking through a science lab with 3 investors from Verizon. They want to sponsor an attraction, and Claire is attempting to get them to sponsor the park's latest project, the Indominus Rex. Dr. Henry Wu comes in to help explain the new dinosaur, and the investors are sold. Now, at this point, I must confess that there are some scenes in this movie with so many issues in them all at once that I may have to give a brief overview and then walk line by line through the scene. This happens to be one of them. So let's take it from the top, shall we? Before getting into the many issues this scene has, I would note that it seems like a nice, subtle homage to the original Jurassic Park to have the guests watching behind glass as the scientists do their work on various dinosaur eggs. And this is very similar to the tour setup in the original Jurassic Park and is a nice little detail. You see, I'm not completely heartless. Anyways, Claire begins her pitch in this scene by saying, while year-over-year revenue continues to climb, operating costs are higher than ever. Our shareholders have been patient, but let's be honest, no one's impressed by a dinosaur anymore. Oh my. Where to begin? Right, so I've worked some sales jobs in my life, but I am by no means an expert on this. So please, take this with a grain of salt, but if you're pitching an investment opportunity to someone, why on earth would you lead with your financial struggles? Is there nothing better you can think of to convince people that they will receive a return on their investment? She's basically just told these people that they, as a company, are quickly becoming unprofitable. But it gets even worse when she says,
Let's be honest. No one's impressed by a dinosaur anymore.
Now why is this bad? Well, Jurassic World offers one thing that you can't get anywhere else in the entire universe. Dinosaurs. If you don't come here, you can't see them. Period. This is their entire shtick. Their big attractor and main selling point. And not only that, but she is currently trying to convince these business people to sponsor the very thing she just said no one cares about anymore. In other words, Claire's pitch so far can be boiled down to, as a company, we are quickly becoming less and less profitable and no one cares about our one and only selling point. Now would you like to give us money to slap your name on that thing no one cares about? I'm sure you'll see a return on investment. Sadly, we are just getting started with this scene. Let's consider Claire's statement here from another angle. She claims that
No one's impressed by a dinosaur anymore.
and that
These days, kids look at a stegosaurus like an elephant from the city zoo.
Now, a little context may be helpful to show these words for how absurd they really are. Relatively recent statistics show that there are over 2,400 zoos in the United States alone. Older statistics have the worldwide estimate at around 10,000 zoos. That's quite a few. As common as they are, zoos are still quite popular, it would seem. The number is a little outdated, but in 2012, 175 million Americans visited zoos during the year according to the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. That's half the population of the country. It would seem that kids love to see the elephants at their local zoo, and so do their parents. Now, it's fair to assume it's more expensive to visit Jurassic World than your local zoo, but that doesn't even come close to saving this line of reasoning, and there are several reasons why. First of all, like I said a moment ago, people still actually like going to zoos. If a kid really does see a stegosaurus like an elephant, that doesn't mean he doesn't want to see it. Secondly, dinosaurs have only been brought back from extinction for about 20 years now, and people haven't had access to them for most of that time. It's insane to think they would be old news after only a few years. Thirdly, unlike a zoo, there's only one place on Earth you can go to see a dinosaur. It's not like everyone can just hop in a car and go see one. In fact, most people on Earth probably still haven't seen one in person. If this park existed today, it would be the most popular place on the planet. Everyone would want to go there. It would simply be a matter of being able to afford it and waiting until it isn't fully booked. If they aren't incompetent in their pricing, this park should be more than extremely profitable. This is extremely contrived, and it matters a lot, but we'll get to why in just a moment. Now, there is another question concerning sponsorships. Why aren't the other animals already sponsored? We know they have some sponsorships, as the Innovation Center is the Samsung Innovation Center. So why not bring sponsors on for the T-Rex? There's clearly no sponsor noted on its sign. You don't think anyone would want to sponsor the most recognizable dinosaur in the universe? I mean, one of these things wrecked the crap out of San Diego a few years ago. This would be a supremely popular dinosaur. This is definitely a real leap in logic here. Anyways, Claire then moves into another room and stands in front of a screen with a DNA double helix displayed on it. She tells the group that,
But consumers want them bigger, louder, more teeth.
Later in the scene, she will tell them,
Every time we've unveiled a new asset, attendance has spiked.
This is where the movie forgets that it is indeed a sequel. You see, the biggest carnivore in Jurassic World is the T-Rex. They then took the base genome of the T-Rex, threw a bunch of other crap into it, and made a bigger carnivore that looks like a T-Rex with a few upgrades. According to Masrani later in this movie, the I-Rex has cost $26 million to create. This is not to mention the fact that they created an animal that is apparently much more volatile than the rest of the animals in the park, and the science and animal experts employed by the park should definitely have known this going in. In fact, we find out later in the movie that Wu at least knew this was possible. He states that you can't have enhanced predatory features without the behavioral issues that come with it. Apparently that's a package deal. This is not even mentioning the fact that this animal never existed. For at least a group of people, this would be less interesting and exciting than the other dinosaurs, because they aren't looking at a piece of ancient history brought back to life. They're looking at something wholly cooked up in a lab. If I go to a zoo, I would be far more excited to see a lion than a lion, tiger, turtle, great white shark, pigeon hybrid. That isn't a real animal in that sense. And though that may not be the case for everyone, it certainly would be for some, which moves it down the to-breed list. But why did I say this movie forgot it was a sequel? Well, Claire gave 3 criteria that people are looking for. Bigger, louder, and more teeth. And herein lies our problem. They already had the capacity to breed a dinosaur that, at least in this universe, fills all 3 criteria. The Spinosaurus. Now, I'm not saying that the Spinosaurus is what I wanted to see again in a Jurassic movie. Frankly, I still haven't forgiven it for being in Jurassic Park 3. But based off the reasoning given to us by the writers, this would have been a far better and more obvious choice for the next attraction, not to mention cheaper to make. At around 50 feet long, the Spino is bigger than the 40-foot T-Rex and equal to the 50-foot I-Rex. Compared to what they already had in the park, it's bigger. Based off the fight scenes from Jurassic Park 3 and Jurassic World, the Spino and I-Rex seem comparable in how loudly they greet their T-Rex opponent, so by whatever metric the I-Rex is deemed to be louder, the Spino is as well. Now, exactly how many teeth the Spino actually had in real life is a bit harder to pin down, but in Jurassic Park 3, it's clear to see that it had way more teeth than the T-Rex. Bigger, louder, more teeth. It fulfills all three categories. But the Spino had some advantages even over the I-Rex. Firstly, it's a very different dinosaur from the previous biggest carnivore, the T-Rex. Whereas the I-Rex looks like a souped-up T-Rex, the Spino looks very different. The giant sail on the back, longer snout, and generally different build all help to identify this as a very different animal. In contrast, as an anecdote, one of my nephews loves this movie, but for the longest time he kept calling the Indominus the T-Rex. He couldn't tell the difference. And even if you notice some differences, the Spino is clearly a more distinct animal. As such, it's likely to garner more interest from even the more casual fan as it's more distinct. Secondly, the Spino has been bred before. They can better know how it will act and how to best care for it while not agitating it to the point where it's trying to break out. In other words, it's much less of a liability concern. This is not to mention the fact that it should save the park the better part of $26 million as the research and development side of things is basically already done. Heck, fly over to the other island and sedate the thing, pick it up, and bring it over to your park, and now you have a free Spino. Thirdly, unlike the I-Rex, the Spinosaurus was a real dinosaur. In fact, it was the largest carnivore to ever exist. When you look at the Spino, in a sense, you're looking at a very old piece of history. Knowing this animal used to walk the earth as the biggest carnivore around is sure to excite dinosaur lovers, scientists, science lovers, and more. This isn't to say the I-Rex would be a completely unattractive venture, but based on this movie's reasoning, the Spinosaurus would have been a far more fitting choice for the park. Now, this may seem like a rather unimportant nitpick, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This scene is the writer's attempt to justify the very existence of the movie. Jurassic World's plot revolves around, and therefore relies on, the Indominus Rex. One thing a Spinosaurus couldn't do is escape in the same manner the I-Rex does. Though you could argue the I-Rex couldn't either, but I won't get ahead of myself here. The movie needs the I-Rex to exist, or else its plot points cannot be as the writers wanted. They had certain pieces of their puzzle, and wrote in some excuse for why the pieces exist to begin with. If the I-Rex wasn't a major part of the movie, this would be a valid but relatively unharmful problem for the writing, though still a problem. However, being the entire existence of the movie hangs on this scene, it's a movie-breaking problem. Now, this is certainly the most egregious offense in this scene, but sadly, not all there is to criticize, so let's cover these last few things quickly. Claire asks what the Verizon reps are wanting to sponsor. They respond,
"We want to be thrilled."
And it's at this point that we learn that all the investors from Verizon should be instantly fired for complete incompetence. Imagine being sent out by Verizon to negotiate a sponsorship deal, and having only the desire to be thrilled as the extent of the research you have done for your job. Brilliant. They double down on their ignorance of the place they're looking to sponsor when they ask how they get two different kinds of dinosaurs to, This implies that they both haven't had any contact on the park's new projects, as well as the fact that they apparently haven't been listening, as just moments ago Claire said, "Our advances in gene splicing have opened up a whole new frontier. We've learned more from genetics in the past decade than a century of digging up bones." They also don't seem to get what genetically modified is usually in reference to. Perhaps they were distracted, or even with this information they think it's easier to get a T-Rex and a Raptor to mate. But no matter how you slice it, these men being written to be completely incompetent is simply poor writing. How are we to expect to believe these people advanced high enough up in Verizon to be sent out to negotiate this deal, but they lack basic cognitive skills? Ultimately, the writers sacrificed the competence of the characters for what they hoped would be a quick laugh. What would have been a much better scene is if these people had come in with a few different options in mind and had been discussing them with Claire only for her to pull the I-Rex on them and pitch it in a way they couldn't refuse. Imagine they come in with criteria they're looking for. "We want to sponsor the T-Rex. We plan to use it in ads showing the unbeatable strength of our wireless network." Is this striking gold? No. But it's better than what we got. This demonstrates they're studied and good at their job, as well as allowing Claire to more effectively show that she's good at her job as well. This could be more difficult, sure, but good writing is worth it. Now, the last thing I'll say to finish off this scene is that Claire is introduced as a very basic corporate person. Like the boys, she will only have one character trait for half this film. She is corporate person, and that's basically all she is. This scene isn't the worst we see of this in Claire, but from how she acts on the elevator to the stiff and unemotional portrayal to her calling the dinosaurs assets, the foundation is laid for her to have no character whatsoever. If you're starting to see a pattern here, you're not crazy. Also, one last thing. Her spinning the double helix seemed very odd. This may just be me, but I couldn't help but think, why are you randomly spinning the screen? It just took me out of the film a bit, so it seemed worth mentioning. Also, the word phosphorus on the screen is misspelled as phosphorus, so that's a good look. Although I suppose you could take this as a callback to when Jurassic Park misspelled both Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus. Not the callback I would have gone for, but different strokes, I suppose. And with that, we are finally through with that single scene. You can't say I didn't warn you. Like I said before, there are several scenes just dripping with terrible writing, and it may take some time to break it all down, so thank you for your patience. Anyways, let's move on with the movie. We next see the boys entering the Innovation Center. Like the previous scenes, Zack is slowly and disinterestedly following as Gray urges them to go faster. Oh, the babysitter's there too, but this movie basically ignores her, so I may as well follow suit. For now, that is. The Innovation Center itself is very similar to the Visitor Center from Jurassic Park, and is another nice homage to the lineage of the franchise. There is what seems to be a statue of John Hammond in the background, and it's once again little details like this that lead me to believe the writers really did love the original Jurassic Park. Unfortunately, these details are not what makes writing great, so we move on. The scene pans from several different exhibits around the building and does a good job imitating the environment of a museum. Many of the exhibits are somewhat fanciful in their technology, but still, the film does portray the kind of experience one would expect in this kind of building. Sadly, the writers don't feel like they have told you enough about the one character trait of Gray, so they show that he is familiar with the 4 nitrogenous bases found in DNA. He even offers some exposition of these bases just in case you didn't get the picture that he is, in fact, a nerd. Zack walks up and tells Gray to not walk off because Mom's not paying me for babysitting. I suppose you could say there has so far been consistent character writing, though that isn't overly difficult when there is only one ascertainable characteristic to everything that breathes in this world. Anyways, Claire then enters the scene on the phone as Gray runs to give her a hug. We here learn that it's been 7 years since she has seen them, even though she only thought it was 3 or 4. Claire tells them she won't be able to go with them for the day, and Gray is visibly disappointed. She says a few more things to try to excite them, and walks off on the phone. I won't try to beat a dead horse here too much. I'll simply note that the corporate person tag is being pushed pretty hard. Not knowing how long it's been since seeing her nephews, not having time to spend with family, constantly being on the phone managing things, and so on. It's as if we just saw 3 different characteristics interact with each other. But we've been over that enough for now. However, the movie does seem to be telling us she's a bad aunt because of her lack of knowledge. She doesn't remember how long it's been since seeing the boys, and this means she's in the wrong. Later in the movie, she won't remember exactly how old the boys are, and once again, it seems the movie is telling us this is a character flaw for her. Now, I feel like this may be a bit unreasonable to expect from someone. Claire hasn't seen them in 7 years, so they aren't likely very close. She has her own life to live, and apparently her sister's children haven't played a giant role in that life. Some families may be super tight and close to where the aunts know these things, but it isn't a requirement to being a good person. It isn't a character flaw when you think about it. But no, she's bad corporate person. Anyways, moving on, we see Claire enter the control room and we get a look at the behind-the-scenes operation of Jurassic World. Claire asks if there was any incidents, but notices that the man answering her question, Lowry, is wearing a shirt from the original park. Apparently she believes it's in poor taste, but for the life of me I can't figure out why. Everything from the Jurassic World logo to the park itself is clearly modeled after the original park. The implication she's making is that it's in some way inappropriate, but the movie never tells us why. Lowry guesses that it may be because people died there, but that doesn't make any sense. For example, people will wear shirts from the Battle of Gettysburg for several different reasons, and no one happens to find it offensive that I'm aware of. However, people died there. If that's the sole criteria, as we'll see in a moment, then this line of reasoning makes no sense and doesn't stand scrutiny. However, Lowry's defense of wearing the shirt is even more confusing as he says, "That first park was legit. You know, I have a lot of respect for it. They didn't need these genetic hybrids, they just needed dinosaurs, real dinosaurs." Now, this may very well be the opinion of the audience. However, the question is, why does he think that? We love the first park, not because of the park, but because of the movie. But in Lowry's world, that movie doesn't exist. To him, it would be more of a tragic story of incompetence where dinosaurs broke out and killed people. And what does he mean by they didn't need these genetic hybrids? That park never opened. The reason we're told this park needs them is because they need a boost to revenue. Something the original park couldn't have dreamt of because it never got off the ground to begin with. Seriously, from this man's perspective, why on earth would anyone respect the original park? It was a dismal failure. Now, worth noting here is what Lowry's willing to brush aside to adore the original park, that being people dying there. Why is that important? Well, Lowry throughout the movie is very cynical toward the current park. He mocks both Masrani and Claire for their flippant approach to protecting people. However, if that's truly something he cares deeply about, wouldn't he be even more cynical toward the original park? Again, many people died at the original park before it could even launch. The current park has at least lasted this long without any major incident like the original. So if the protection of life is his reason to be cynical towards something, why isn't he cynical towards the original park rather than just brushing aside the fact that people died there? This would seem to be an inconsistency in the character writing. Now, you may think that perhaps the park being a failure is why Claire thinks the shirt was in poor taste. This would seem to make sense, except that she seems to be shut down by Lowry's logic. She seems to agree that he is right about the park being legit, but as she doesn't want to be shown to be wrong, she tells him not to wear it again and moves on. The scene very much seems to be saying she doesn't like the shirt simply because, as Lowry points out, people did die there. Now, at this point, I feel like I must apologize because it feels like we're going at a snail's pace so far, but I feel I must highlight how common terrible writing is in this film. Even the casual conversations don't make a lick of sense. Anyways, Claire says she closed the deal with Verizon, and there are several jokes about the corporate sponsorship from Lowry. As humor is, in large part, subjective, I will only say the jokes landed pretty well for me here. Claire asks why the West Plains are closed, pointing to the red area on the map in front of her. However, this area was not red just moments ago when she entered the room. You might say it just happened, but Vivian, the one Claire asks about it, seems to be fully informed already. This isn't a major deal, but seemed worth pointing out at least. There's also a conversation about Packies shorting out their implants, which leads to Claire wanting them to move the sedated dinosaur. Lowry then states one of the major themes of the movie to Claire: "You do understand these are actual animals, right?" Claire seems taken back by this and makes fun of Lowry's desk to deflect from the criticism. We'll discuss themes a bit more at the end of the critique, so I won't dwell too much on it here. I just find it a bit odd that this movie comes right out and states its themes up front. We'll see this again in the next scene as well. However, with how they speak with each other, it seems like Lowry and Claire are brand new to working together, but I don't think that's supposed to be the case. But if they've worked together for a while, wouldn't Lowry already know how she views the animals? This trend will also continue into the next scene. Nobody seems familiar with each other. This seems very odd. What's happening? Anyways, Claire leaves the control room and walks to the helicopter pad. A helicopter lands, picks her up, and takes off again. This scene introduces us to the park's owner, Simon Masrani, who's flying the helicopter. Masrani is a fun-loving, light-hearted character, but this scene and the following scene show that, for as successful as he seems to be, he's entirely out of the loop of even basic information on the park that he runs. When taking off, he says,
"Okay, now show me my new dinosaur."
Implying he has yet to see this massive project that has cost him and the park $26 million. It's not impossible, it just seems a bit odd. You would think that the owner would be fairly informed on this massive expenditure, but as we will see more clearly in the next scene, he's completely oblivious, even though he personally requested the creation of this dinosaur. Now, during the ride over to the Irex pen, Claire keeps trying to bring in statistics and metrics into the conversation, only to be shut down by Masrani. Which leaves me with the question: how long has she worked for him exactly? If this is how he is as a person, wouldn't she know that by now? But she acts as if this is her first week with the boss. It seems the movie is trying to continually reinforce Claire as corporate person. She's trying to cite their metrics for crowd happiness and their statistics on growth, while Masrani wants to have a more down-to-earth conversation. This again continuing the theme from the last scene, where these people who supposedly have worked together for quite a while don't seem to know each other at all. Now also during this scene, we see that Masrani has, at least in his words, learned from John Hammond, as he says,
The key to a happy life is to accept you are never actually in control.
This is once again the movie coming right out and saying the theme. Again, more on that at the end of the critique. But what is a bit odd is what Masrani says the park exists for. He claims, Jurassic World exists to remind us how very small we are, how new. You can't put a price on that. Though this may sound like a nice way of looking at things, this is absurd for a couple of reasons. Number 1, Jurassic World cannot exist if there's no profit. Scientists, builders, control room workers, etc. all do not work for free. Not to mention, no money doesn't make the board very happy. So to try to pretend that the money literally isn't even a consideration for the owner of the park seems to be more than a stretch. Generally, you don't become wealthy enough to own Jurassic World by this frivolous financial approach. Number 2, Jurassic World at the time of this helicopter ride stands as a clear and unambiguous demonstration of just how big mankind is. The apex animals of millennia ago are all caged and shown off for the enjoyment of man. If anything, this is a demonstration of how big man is, not small. You could argue that the I-Rex breaking out shows how truly small and powerless man is, but that's knowledge this character doesn't have right now. Mankind has conquered the best the dinosaurs have to offer. That is what Jurassic World teaches. Now, as I'm attempting to be fair with the movie here, there are several jokes in this sequence, especially between Masrani and his instructor, and they all landed fairly well for me. Again, what is and isn't funny is fairly subjective, but I want to give the credit where I believe it's due. This is one thing I can say for the movie, is that the humor seems to be mostly well done. It wasn't tone deaf and it wasn't over the top. Also, they almost hit a bird while Masrani was flying. That would have been unfortunate, right? Anyways, upon landing, Masrani looks at the paddock and asks, "Are you still building?" Claire informs him that the dinosaur is bigger than they expected and they had to build the enclosure bigger. This serves to once again show that Masrani is clueless about this project. From the various shots, we see the construction crews working on several different areas of the paddock. As innocuous as this detail may seem right now, it will be important for us later. What is a bit odd, however, is that the difference of what can only be a few feet in the dinosaur's size made them have to scramble to build it bigger. Remember, the I-Rex turns out to be about 50 feet long when fully grown, yet she was designed to be bigger than the T-Rex, which is about 40 feet. And I can't help but wonder, is the one who designed this paddock so incompetent that a few feet makes that significant of a difference? Even if it was only expected to be 45 feet long, did you not leave yourself a safe buffer? Now, I don't know about you, but the zoo exhibits I've seen are usually not only built to be able to barely contain the animals. That would be stupid. You always build with plenty of buffer so that it's secure beyond any reasonable doubt. Regardless, the writers are telling us that there was no forethought or even common sense involved in this project, apparently. Claire and Masrani then walk into the observatory as Claire tells some of the troubles they had raising the animal. Masrani then asks about a window near Claire with a big crack. Claire explains that the I-Rex tried to break the glass. It would seem she was not fully capable of breaking the glass, as the window, though cracked, was not punctured. Now, it's perfectly reasonable to assume that the glass in the viewing area is reinforced and built to take a blow or two. In fact, it would seem extremely stupid to just put your average window glass in here. Either way, it seems the I-Rex is incapable of breaking reinforced glass, even though she tried. Once again, this will be important later. Oh, and one last note on this window. The shots before and after viewing the crack have the window with no crack in it. This isn't a very weighty mistake, as it doesn't affect the story, but it is a mistake nonetheless. Masrani then gets a look at some of the dinosaur and seems to be in awe. Claire asks him, "Think it'll scare the kids?" Masrani replies, "This'll give the parents nightmares." There's hesitant music playing in the background, and the scene is played in such a way that Masrani's statement comes across as very believable. However, once again, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. If the T-Rex doesn't give the parents nightmares, why would a slightly bigger alternative T-Rex give them nightmares? Is it so monumentally bigger that one would scare you but the other wouldn't? If you aren't scared by seeing a lion, the tiger isn't likely to do it either, although the tiger and the lion are more dissimilar than the T-Rex and I-Rex. Masrani then once again demonstrates how very out of the loop he is by asking where the sibling is, only for Claire to inform him that she ate it. As much as this exposition helps bring the audience along with some background information, this is absolutely information the owner of the park should know. If the writers wanted to give the information to the audience, they need to put it in a place where it doesn't damage the characters they've set up. Now, you may argue that this movie is trying to tell you that Masrani is removed from the details and that's why some of this stuff happens, but the movie tells us later that he personally commissioned the creation of this dinosaur. Yet now, we're expected to believe that one of them ate the other one and he knew nothing about it? This again is not even a mention that you don't get to his position by being completely oblivious of everything you're supposed to be over. Give the audience this information, that's great, but do so in a way that doesn't ruin the credibility of your story and characters. However, if there is a praiseworthy element to this scene, it's that they don't show the mysterious monster too soon. This helps to build the anticipation and excitement for when the I-Rex is finally revealed. It's similar to how you don't see the T-Rex for quite some time in Jurassic Park. In fact, they're parked right in front of the T-Rex paddock for some time before finally getting the glorious reveal. The footsteps are heard, the goat is eaten, and the lawyer runs away terrified, all before the T-Rex is seen. This doesn't affect the story overall, but it's a good choice by the director nonetheless. Finishing off this scene, Masrani is concerned about the security of the paddock, so he instructs Claire to bring in Owen Grady. Claire's response implies they have a history, but we'll get there in a little bit. We move now to the next scene where we're seeing a pig being chased by 4 raptors. The pig escapes into a small enclosure with a metal door, the door closes, and the raptors stop their pursuit. Their attention is then called to a man standing on a walkway above them. Enter Owen Grady. Owen gets the raptors to follow some simple commands and throws them each a rat as a reward. He releases them back to roam as they please, and the onlookers are impressed. Now, this character introduction seems to have much more effort put into it than the others we've seen so far, and this may be because Owen himself has more effort put into him as a character. I'll leave that to you to judge as the movie progresses. Either way, rather than the blatant nerd, the disinterested teen, or the corporate person, Owen more resembles an actual human being rather than an overplayed characteristic. Owen's intro shows him to be disciplined, he knows his job, and he commands attention. What they don't do is give him an extremely obvious characteristic that defines who he is. Thankfully, you can't really just slap a title like nerd or corporate person on Owen based on this introduction, and even more so after the conversation to follow. On a side note, Owen pauses before throwing the rat to Blue, which is likely to foreshadow a special care he has for the raptor. When Owen releases the raptors, he begins talking with 2 other men. Barry, a co-worker of Owen's, and Vic Hoskins, head of the Jurassic World security force and Owen's boss. Barry congratulates Owen, who seems relieved at the success, and Hoskins approaches and is pleased and impressed. Owen is quick to let him know that this is not the usual outcome. However, with how the raptors followed Owen, Hoskins tells him he wants a field test with the raptors, and Owen starts to walk off. Hoskins attempts to reason with Owen and reveals that he plans to use the raptors as weapons of war. According to Hoskins, Owen, quote, knew the end game, end quote, when he was hired, so this should come as no surprise to him. Sadly, this is the part where a scene that started well absolutely implodes on itself. Hoskins wants to use the testing they are doing to develop weaponized raptors. I know for many of you, no explanation is required to understand why this is a monumentally stupid idea, but let's go through a few of these reasons anyway. First of all, the logistics of having a raptor squad would be a strain on resources to say the least. From space to food to transportation and more, they would be highly impractical and inefficient in nearly every situation. Not only would they take up far more space and food than the canine units, but they would also be far harder to transport and far harder to train. This is not to mention that they would be no more effective in combat either, but more on that one in a second. Secondly, the PR nightmare that would result if a pack of raptors did ever pull off a successful attack would be monstrous. Imagine the outrage when the national news headline reads something to the effect of, American raptor forces eviscerate 5 terrorist members, their wives, and the 23 children in the tunnel system with them. I could go on, but I think you get the picture on that one. Thirdly, raptors would be extremely ineffective as a weapon. In this scene, Hoskins tells Owen that
Nature gave us the most effective killing machines 75 million years ago. And now we know they can take orders.
However, thanks to Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, we know that it only takes a singular bullet from a handgun to completely neutralize a raptor. Blue is shot once in the chest and would have presumably died had it not been for the medical aid she received. Keep in mind that this is likely a 9mm round or some other smaller caliber. Now imagine 4 raptors charging a group of men all armed with semi-auto or automatic rifles firing 5.56 or 7.62. They wouldn't have a prayer unless for some strange reason they were in extremely long grass. So it would seem that guns and bullets are a more effective killing machine after all. Now this isn't even to mention just how many raptors you would need to have them be of any use, how expensive it would be to breed, raise, and train these animals, and more. So you'll have to forgive me if I must call bullcrap on anyone with half a brain thinking that weaponized raptors would remotely resemble a good idea. Who wrote this crap? And just when you think the scene couldn't get any worse, the writers promptly ask someone to hold their alcoholic beverage and immediately make it far worse. Let me walk you through the events here, and then we will deal with this dismal excuse for a scene. As Owen is talking with Hoskins, Leon, one of the workers, yells that a pig has gotten loose. The worker runs to the overhead ramp and lowers the pole with a rope on the end to put around the pig's neck. However, just as the rope gets on the pig, one of the raptors snatches the pig at a high speed and rips the pole and worker into the raptor paddock. Owen runs in while ordering security to not shoot and has a standoff with the raptors. The raptors are in an aggressive stance but don't attack. Owen narrowly escapes by rolling under the closing gate just before the raptors can pounce, and the scene ends shortly after. Now, once again, I am left asking myself where to begin with this scene. And I do have to ask, how on earth did that pig get free? We saw it run into a metal room with a sliding metal door. Do they employ such incompetent workers that they just open the door back up? I highly doubt that the pig broke out all by its lonesome. Regardless, the writers needed this contrivance and a few others to get their scene, and they didn't feel like explaining how this could happen, so this is where things are. Now, in a paddock with 4 raptors, why would you think you'll be able to reclaim the pig if it gets free? Especially when the raptors are right there by where the pig is. It seems like the smart thing to me is just let the raptors have their bacon. I mean, is this really that big of a deal? Are pigs that expensive that you can't just get another one? Do you not have a big supply of them already? What would you do if the raptors had caught the pig in the chase earlier to open the scene? Clearly, if that's a possibility, the pigs have to be kinda disposable, right? What if the pig runs literally anywhere but under the platform going across the pen? The pig is dead within moments if you don't get it out of there. So is it really reasonable to assume you'd even be able to get it back in the event that it doesn't run to the perfect spot? And who thought it was a good idea to stick a pole down into the raptor pen? Can the raptors not just grab onto the pole and rip the workers into the pen if we're to assume that's how this works? We know they'll attack inanimate objects going all the way back to the first Jurassic Park.
That's why we have to feed them like this. She had them all attacking the fences when the feeders came.
Not to mention, what was the plan when you get the rope around the pig's neck? Try to hoist it out while the raptors start taking bites? You know the pigs can strangle as well, right? And being there would be such a limited time frame to retrieve the pig before the raptors get there, if they are going to try to rescue it, do they not plan for the fact that a raptor may try to grab the pig while you have it on the rope? Like, do they expect the raptor to go, oh darn, it's on the rope, I guess they got it back, I lose, GG, we'll try again next time. And not only that, but with the force that the pig is jerked away with, wouldn't the pole just fly out of his hand? In fact, if you slow it down, you can see that it does get jerked out of one of his hands, but the other hand holds on with enough force to take him over a railing that goes to his chest. How does he hold on that tightly with one hand? Either way, he has now plopped down in front of 3 raptors, and there is little doubt that they will immediately pounce on him and tear him limb from limb. After all, he's in a completely helpless position on the ground and will certainly be easy prey. Except they don't pounce on him, and I can't help but wonder why. He isn't standing them down, he has no connection with them, and there are 3 of them. Although main characters in some of the Jurassic movies seem to always get hesitant raptors when they need it, raptors have been seen to strike quickly when they have the upper hand, yet these 3 don't. Convenient. Now, why on earth would the security guards not shoot? They're seen aiming before Owen can tell them not to shoot, and this is absolutely an aim and fire situation. I doubt they're waiting for the command. Even with Owen telling them not to fire and charging in, isn't this precisely why they're there? They appear to have non-lethal rounds that are likely what they're using later in the movie. They won't be killing the raptors, though they may set the project back a bit. Either way, the best they can tell, 2 people are about to get mauled and murdered by these raptors. What's the alternative? Wait until they jump them and then open fire, likely hitting everyone and still getting the men killed? I get that Owen doesn't want to lose their trust, but that's certainly better than both of them losing their lives, isn't it? By the way, rip this line about them not ever trusting him again. Fallen Kingdom shows Blue get put on the verge of death because she was shot with Owen right there, and yet she's like a loyal hound for him afterwards. So either Fallen Kingdom is a retcon, or Owen is just completely wrong in this scene. This isn't necessarily an error from this movie, though. I just find it funny that the sequel pretended that the details from this movie just didn't exist. Anyways, Owen has his standoff with the raptors, and the 4th raptor joins the group, and they take an extremely aggressive stance, even to the point of being posed to pounce. But they hold off just long enough for Owen to escape. The fact that the raptors do attempt to attack even Owen throws a major problem into this scene. Being there are 3 and eventually 4 raptors surrounding him on 3 sides, I don't know what they're waiting for. You could argue that they're waiting for him to turn his back, but he isn't a threat to 1 raptor, not to mention 4. Not to mention the fact that we see raptors attacking straight on several times in this movie. And that's still not mentioning the fact that as Owen turns to see a raptor on one side or the other, rather than in the middle, he's completely blind to the one on the opposite side and perfect to be attacked, if for some reason that's what they're holding out for. If they're willing to attack him, which they are, what are they waiting for? Nevertheless, this is the scene we got. Once Owen is safe, he has a brief discussion with Leon, the new guy. Owen tells him to never turn his back to the cage. The camera moves a bit to show a raptor a foot or 2 from Leon trying to get to him from the cage. Now, I'm not really sure what this was for, except perhaps a quick laugh, maybe? I mean, the guy didn't fall into the pen because he had his back to the cage, so this has nothing to do with what just happened. Not only that, but no sooner do the words, "Don't ever turn your back to the cage," leave his mouth than Owen turns his back to the cage and walks away. This is not to mention the fact that his back was turned to the cage when he began speaking to Leon. Guys? Did you just give up on this scene? Is that it? See, I'm still here trying to figure this one out. Brilliant. Again, I can't for the life of me think of any reason this mound of writing crap would be in the scene if it isn't for a quick laugh. What started out as a very solid scene with the introduction of Owen's character quickly took a nosedive into a whirlwind of completely illogical writing at a neck-breaking speed. But with that being said, I suppose we can finally put an end to this particular scene. And with that, I must bring this first episode to a close. Thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. As I said before, this is my first time with a massive undertaking such as this, and I'm learning a lot in the process. Please feel free to let me know what you think of the critique so far in the comments. I understand that the production value may be somewhat lacking, but that isn't due to a lack of effort, just so you know. Now, as to how long it will be until the next episode is released, frankly, I don't know at the moment. It takes a long time of recording and editing to put one of these episodes out, and I don't really have the timing figured out at this point. What I can tell you is that by the time you're seeing this, I will have already begun working hard on the next episode with the desire to get it out as quickly as I can while maintaining some level of quality. I hope to have it out in a month, but that is certainly not a guarantee. Just so you know, this project has very much so become a labor of love for me, so I don't lack any motivation to put any extra time I have into it. It's just a matter of chipping away at this behemoth of a project. But that being said, thank you so much for staying to this point, and I can't wait to get the next episode out for you. Have a great day, and goodbye.